Let me start with a question. Not a rhetorical one, an actual question that sits underneath a huge percentage of human history, human religion, human philosophy, human war, and human art, and that almost nobody asks directly. Are we alone in our own story? Not alone in the universe, that's a different, easier question. I mean, has the human story been authored entirely by humans, or has something else had a hand in it? Before you reach for the tinfoil hat, hold on. Because I'm not starting from the ancient aliens built the pyramids. I'm starting from what does the data actually say? What does the full, unedited record of human belief and encounter describe? Does that record show patterns? If it does, what would those patterns predict? And have those predictions come true? That's the methodology, pattern recognition, longitudinal testing, predictive modeling. It's what you do in counterintelligence when you're trying to understand an adversary whose intentions are unclear and whose communications are unreliable. You don't start by deciding what's real. You start by mapping what you've got. What we have is thousands of years of testimony across every culture and continent, consistently describing contact with intelligences that are not human. Not angels in a vague spiritual sense, specific, structured, hierarchical, purposeful, non-human intelligences. Beings that interact with humans, that give instructions, that make demands, that operate by their own account and by the account of those who have encountered them according to a chain of command. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians described the Ennead. The Hebrew tradition gives us the Elohim, a plural word, and the divine council in the book of Job. The Gnostics described planetary rulers called Archons. The Vedic tradition gives us Devas and Asuras, locked in an ongoing conflict over who controls the cosmos. The modern UAP community calls them non-human intelligence, or NHI. Same phenomenon, different language. The labels change with the cultural context. The underlying claim does not. And I'll state my position clearly here. The null hypothesis that non-human intelligences do not exist and have never influenced human affairs requires throwing out an extraordinary amount of data to sustain. That's a bold claim. And unlike the positive claim, the null hypothesis is not falsifiable. What you can do is notice when the volume and consistency of the signal becomes too large to dismiss without motivated reasoning. We are at that point. So today, we're looking at what I call the Solar Lodge, not a single organization, a pattern. The recurring claim across human history that there is a hierarchy of intelligence above us, that it has a solar or light-based character, and that it interacts with humans through structured channels we call initiation, religion, and revelation, and that the entire point and project of human civilization might be better understood as a managed system than as an autonomous, self-organizing one. I'm not telling you it's true. I'm asking you to look at the data with me. The term wilderness of mirrors comes from James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's longtime counterintelligence chief. When you're operating in an environment saturated with disinformation, where every source might be a plant, every witness might be a cutout, you can't evaluate anything in isolation. You look for patterns that persist across independent sources. You ask what a given piece of information would require to be true, and you test your models against new data. The field we are working in is saturated with intentional noise. Government programs have deliberately seeded UFO mythology with disinformation to protect classified programs. That's documented, not speculation. Ancient texts have been translated and edited by institutional gatekeepers. But none of that means there's no signal. It means that the signal is hard to find and extremely easy to fake, which is exactly what you would expect if the phenomenon is real and sufficiently powerful parties don't want it understood. Here's the key question. Who benefits from a particular version of events being believed? If non-human intelligences have been managing human affairs for thousands of years, who benefits from that being unknown to ordinary people? First, whoever is doing the managing. Second, any human intermediaries, priestly classes, initiatory orders, intelligence agencies, who serve as the interface layer. The entire structure of esoteric religion and secret societies makes a lot more sense if there's something genuinely worth keeping compartmentalized. Conversely, if it's all nonsense, the disinformation campaigns make no sense. You don't run an active deception operation against a non-existent threat. The energy expended on UFO disinformation alone, well documented from FOIA materials, implies somebody thought that this mattered. The Solar Lodge pattern has three consistent features across every culture and era. 1. A hierarchical structure of intelligences, with humans somewhere in the middle, above animals, below multiple levels of non-human entities. 2. A solar or light-based character to the higher levels. These entities are described in terms of light, fire, radiance. 3. A managed relationship with humanity. The higher intelligences interact through specific channels: prophets, initiates, mystery schools, specific bloodlines. And that management is contested. Some traditions say it's benevolent guidance, others say it's control. Start with Sumer, roughly 3500 BCE. The Anunnaki have specific names, specific roles, specific areas of jurisdiction. They have a chain of command. Anu is at the top. Below him are Enlil, often hostile to humanity, and Enki, the patron of wisdom who often acts as humanity's advocate. In one famous text, the council decides to wipe humanity out with a flood. Enki defects and warns a human. The human builds a boat. You know the rest because it appeared almost verbatim in Genesis 2,000 years later. Both stories share the same structure, a non-human council making decisions about humanity, individual members defecting to advocate for specific humans, and the result being the survival of a particular lineage. That's not just a flood story, that's a political thriller about who runs the planet. In Egypt, the structure is explicitly solar. Ra is the supreme intelligence of the cosmos. The pharaoh is specifically Ra on Earth, the living interface between the divine council and the human population. The pharaoh is not worshipped because the Egyptians confuse humans with gods. The pharaoh occupies a specific structural role, the node point between two levels of a hierarchy. The Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, is a navigational manual. It tells you which entities you'll encounter after death, what to say to them, and how to get through them without being trapped. It's a technical document. The Hebrew tradition is particularly interesting because the texts preserve evidence of a transformation from a polytheistic divine council model to a monotheistic one. You can see the earlier model bleeding through. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve a tradition where the nations of the earth are divided among the sons of God. Each nation has a non-human overseer. Israel is specifically Yahweh's portion. The distinctive Hebrew claim isn't that other powers don't exist, it's that Yahweh is the senior member, and that his people have a direct relationship with the top of the hierarchy. That's a political claim as much as it is a theological one. And then there's the Book of Job, maybe the strangest and oldest document in the Hebrew Bible. God and Satan, Ha-Satan, the adversary, who is explicitly a member of the divine council at this point, sit down and make a wager about a man named Job. They discuss it like executives at a meeting. The implications for human autonomy are not comfortable. Vedic cosmology gives us the same architecture, explicitly solar at its center. The sun is not a physical object that happens to produce light. It is the manifestation, the physical manifestation, of a cosmic intelligence. Above it are successive orders of being. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are not fairy tales. They are accounts of human affairs conducted against the backdrop of an ongoing conflict between organized groups of non-human intelligences over control of the material world. In 1922, Alice Bailey published a book called Initiation, Human and Solar. I want to address the sourcing question directly. When we look at a channel text, we can say it's fabricated, or that the author is mentally ill, or perhaps that the text itself is genuine, or at least intended to be genuine. But what can you do in intelligence? Evaluate the content on its merits. Is it internally consistent? Does it predict anything verifiable? Does it match patterns from independent sources? On those tests, Bailey's work is interesting. She describes a cosmology that maps with remarkable precision onto the divine council traditions we've just covered, none of which she explicitly draws on. Here's the model. At the outermost scale is the solar logos, the informing intelligence of our entire solar system. Not God in the personal sense, the consciousness for which the physical sun is the nervous system for you, the physical medium through which a larger intelligence operates. Below are what she calls solar angels, entities that completed their own evolutionary cycle in a previous cosmic period and now serve as the bridge between pure solar fire and human consciousness. This is where it gets conceptually interesting. The solar angels are described as the beings who gave humanity the capacity for individual self-awareness. Before their intervention, humans were conscious only in a general sense, but not self-reflective. The solar angels donated something from their own completed nature to kindle individuation in us. If you're tracking the thread through world religion, this is Prometheus giving fire. This is Lucifer the Lightbringer, before that name got repurposed, illuminating humanity. This is Enki defecting from the Anunnaki Council to give humans wisdom. In every tradition, there's a figure that bridges the solar divine and the human, who hands down something from above that humans weren't supposed to have or needed precisely because they were trapped. Below the solar angels in Bailey's system is the planetary hierarchy, beings who have completed the human evolutionary cycle and now operate beyond human limits. They interact with humanity through initiatory traditions. They are our human initiates, people progressively given access to deeper levels of understanding and contact. What I find most interesting about Bailey's map is how precisely it accounts for the patterns that we've already observed. If you take the divine council traditions from Sumer, Egypt, the Hebrew Bible, the Vedas, and ask what single underlying model could generate all of these, Bailey's model would be a strong candidate. Right number of levels, right relationship between solar principle and the human, right mechanism, right contested quality at the top. Now I have to describe what happens when you flip the frame, because there's another major tradition that describes exactly the same architecture and calls it a prison. The Gnostic texts, most of which were suppressed by Orthodox Christianity and survived only in fragments until the 1945 Nag Hammadi discovery, describe a cosmos structurally identical to the Theosophical model. A supreme divine source, intermediary levels, non-human intelligence is running those levels. But in the Gnostic version, these intelligences, the Archons, are not benevolent guides. They are jailers. The material world was not created by the Supreme God. It was created by a lesser, ignorant being called the Demiurge, the craftsman, who doesn't know he's not at the top of the hierarchy. He thinks he's God. He is wrong. And the world he made reflects his ignorance. It is a trap, where fragments of genuine divine light, human souls, are imprisoned in matter and recycled through reincarnation without making real progress. The Archons don't want you to pass through. Their power depends on your being stuck. The Apocryphon of John, the secret book of John, one of the most important Nag Hammadi texts, has Yahweh as the Demiurge, the local planetary manager who has convinced his subjects he's the ultimate authority. If you've read the Old Testament carefully, that model explains a lot of otherwise confusing behavior. The Gnostic solution is Gnosis, direct personal knowledge of the true God, achieved through interior illumination rather than institutional religion. You can't trust the hierarchy to tell you the truth about the hierarchy. The Gnostic movement was, among other things, a direct epistemological challenge to institutional religious authority, which is probably why that authority suppressed it so thoroughly. So, Bailey says solar hierarchy, benevolent, guides us upward. Gnostics say solar hierarchy, hostile, keeps us trapped, which is right. My counterintelligence read? Both are describing the same phenomenon, and both are probably partially right. A system that is hierarchical and has managed human affairs for a long time could simultaneously produce genuine consciousness development in some individuals, the initiatory path, while maintaining general population control through religious compliance and the suppression of direct gnosis. These aren't contradictory. It's just what a sophisticated management system looks like. The Gnostic demand for direct personal verification, don't take anyone's word for it. Verify it for yourself. It's not paranoid mysticism, it's operational security. The 20th century was a catastrophic stress test of every initiatory tradition in the Western world, and the results tell us something. After 1945, there were essentially two visible trajectories for Solar Lodge ideas. The first was universalist. Dag Hammarskjöld designed the UN meditation room, with a single shaft of natural light descending onto a polished black iron ore altar. No religious symbols. The light falls on everyone equally. The dream was coherent, a solar principle of unifying intelligence, expressed through institutions that transcended national and tribal allegiances. The second trajectory was its exact perversion. The Black Sun mosaic in the SS Ceremonial Hall at Wewelsburg Castle is a 12-spoked solar wheel, installed under Himmler's direction as the symbolic center of an SS initiatory order explicitly modeled on the Grail Knights. It is, architecturally, a solar lodge. It expresses the same cosmological pattern: the central solar symbol, the hierarchical initiatory structure, the sacred geometry, the flame representing spirit. But the content is the precise inversion of the universalist form. Where the Universal Lodge says all human beings participate in solar consciousness and are moving towards it, the Wewelsburg version says only one group has solar consciousness. All others are obstructions to be removed. The reason that the SS structure was coherent enough to function, the reason that it had the genuine feel of an initiatory order to its participants is because the underlying architecture it was built on was real. You can build something structurally sound and functionally monstrous at the same time. The lesson is discernment. The Solar Lodge pattern is not self-validating. The claim to solar authority is not self-validating, whether you're National Socialist Germany or the modern United Nations. The ability to construct an initiatory hierarchy and fill it with compelling ritual is available to genuine guides and to control systems alike. The Gnostic demand for direct personal verification is not paranoia. It is the correct operating procedure. Where we are now. We are in what philosophers are calling a meaning crisis. The traditional containers, organized religion, national mythology, the grand ideological projects of the 20th century, have collapsed faster than anything has grown up to replace them. Scientific materialism has done genuinely great things. It cannot tell you why to get out of bed, what you owe other people, or what any of it means. And into that vacuum, exactly as the pattern would predict, the Solar Lodge mythos is returning. Through the internet, through individual people who picked up a Nag Hammadi text or a Bailey book and felt something click, the Gnostic revival is real and growing. The Jungian revival is very real. And this revival is largely happening outside of any organized structure, with the character the Gnostic tradition itself has always advocated for: direct personal contact with the material, individual discernment of primary sources rather than hierarchical authority. And then there is the NHI question, which has moved in the last few years from the absolute fringe of public discourse to congressional hearings and mainstream media coverage. Credible testimony from military and intelligence personnel, official government acknowledgement of unknown technologies operating in restricted airspace, serious researchers using the term non-human intelligence as a descriptive category. If non-human intelligences are real, and I've laid out a case that dismissing all of the evidence requires a motivated conclusion, then the question of their relationship to the Solar Lodge pattern is not a metaphysical abstraction, it's operational, it matters. Are these the same intelligences the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, the Gnostics called Archons, Bailey called Masters? Are they something new? Something that's always been here and is simply becoming more visible because we've developed technologies that make concealment harder? We don't know. What we do know from the pattern, from the longitudinal record, is that some of them appear to have a stake in human consciousness development, and some appear to have a stake in human consciousness control. Those may not be different factions. They may be the same entity doing both, depending on your position in the hierarchy. The discernment question. How do you tell the difference between genuine illumination and sophisticated manipulation? Is the oldest question in the esoteric tradition. The Gnostic answer: develop your own capacity for direct knowledge to the point where you can evaluate the contact rather than just accepting or rejecting it on faith. The Bailey answer: learn to recognize the signature of a genuine solar intelligence, characterized by its orientation towards your liberation rather than your dependency. The counterintelligence answer: treat every claimed source as potentially hostile until it has demonstrated reliability through a consistent track record. Maintain your own independent analytical capacity. Test the model against the data. Update. These are all the same answer, just in very different languages, of course. The Solar Lodge is not a single organization. It is a pattern, an architecture of relationship between human consciousness and whatever is above it in the hierarchy of intelligence in this part of the cosmos. That architecture shows up consistently and independently across every major human civilization that has tried to think carefully about the nature of reality. It has a solar character: light, fire, consciousness, emanation, hierarchy. It has an initiatory character: structured, graded, demanding something real from those who enter it. And it has a contested character. The question of whether it is for us or over us has never been definitively resolved, probably because the honest answer is both. We are not alone. We have never been alone. The interface between human consciousness and non-human intelligence has been the central subject of religion, esoteric philosophy, and increasingly frontier science and intelligence studies for the entirety of recorded human history. Something is up there, or in there, or out there. Something with a stake in what happens here. The question of what it wants, whether it's trustworthy, and what it would mean to be in a genuine relationship with it rather than its unwitting subjects or willfully ignorant rejectors, that question is as alive now as it was when the first Sumerian scribe scratched the name Anunnaki into wet clay. I'm John. This has been ConspiracySlop. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm asking you to look at what we've got. The data is weird. The pattern is consistent. The implications are uncomfortable. That's usually where the interesting stuff lives. Until next time.